board last year. And tonight there's an urgent warning from the United Nations World Food Programme that a crisis point is near. Simply put, there simply isn't enough money to buy food for the millions who need it most, and if more money isn't found, then food aid in some places may have to be rationed or even halted. Our coverage begins with Nick Miles.
Getting the food to where it's most needed, matching demand with supply during droughts, earthquakes or wars saves millions of lives. But as food prices rise, many more people are at risk of not having enough to eat. The big grain producers, the US and Canada, are still growing the crops, but there's increasing demand to divert them to fuel our cars and power plants instead. And that's not the only thing nudging prices higher. UN figures show that food prices rose by 40% last year because of rising demand from developing countries and high oil prices. Corn prices have jumped to a 12-year high of $5.25 a bushel. And this year, poor countries growing fewer crops themselves and buying in more expensive ones will pay more than a third more for their cereal imports than last year. Even in more developed nations, the price rises of basic foods are eating into family budgets. In Indonesia, the soybean-based staple tempeh has risen 25% over the last year, in part because more land is being given over to producing corn for biofuels. That means fewer, more expensive, locally grown soybeans. Meanwhile, in Pakistan, high world wheat prices have led to unprecedented smuggling and hoarding, driving up prices yet further. Many people do receive cheap wheat subsidized by the government, but it doesn't always reach everyone. Soldiers guarding bags of wheat, an indication of how serious the situation has become. Nick Miles, BBC News.
The World Food Programme is based in Rome, and tonight I spoke with its director about the global crisis in food prices. Gisette Sheeran, according to some of the statistics, and we're talking about 80% increases in the price of staple foods in some countries. That is awfully dramatic. How did that come about?
Well, this is hitting the world's most vulnerable very hard. There's a number of factors driving these higher food prices. We know that the high oil prices really drive food prices because it's fertilizer to harvesting to distribution of foods affected by the high oil prices, but also increased demand in China and India. Also erratic climate. We're seeing more droughts and more floods affecting the food supply system. But those who are hit hardest are those who live on less than $1 a day or less than 50 cents a day in many places.
And how many people are we talking about here?
Well, we've got 860 million people in the world who are threatened with severe hunger every day. For the World Food Programme, we are slated to reach about 73 of the most hungry for the year to come. Our challenge is that even to fill the cup, and this is a cup from our program in Rwanda, it now costs us 40% more than it did in June. And for the U.S. contribution, they're reporting that their purchases since October have gone up 40% to help us fill this cup. So we're really able to put less food in here right now than we were just a few months ago.
So you've got many countries around the world, like the United States, for instance, who are going through their own quasi-recession or real recession in some cases. You've got a greater demand for food. You've got higher prices. It sounds to me like a pretty vicious cycle altogether.
Well, I think it's a challenge, but, you know, when you get to food, it's a question of resiliency. So for those who make 50 cents or $1 a day, what do they cut? They've already cut everything. They've cut education, they've cut health care, they've cut housing expenses, and they're down to filling a couple bowls of rice a day or getting a loaf of bread. So there's nowhere for them to go. Other countries higher up the economic ladder have more resiliency. You can cut out dessert, you cut out meat a couple times a week. So it is squeezing. We're seeing people affected all over the world.
When you talk about rationing, what exactly are you talking about there?
The World Food Programme, I think, sets the record in putting all of its money out in the field. 93% goes to feeding people. But even with all that tight budgeting and cost savings, we still are being affected by an average of 40% higher prices since June, so we can procure less. The bottom line is it hits this red cup with less food, and it hits the rations that we're able to give people with less food. So we're really needing to talk with the main governments that support us and others to say we're going to need some help.